what other podcasts will you find individuals talking about bodybuilding, getting swole, spandex on stage under that light? Rousseau, The Social Contract, talking about books, talking about politics a little bit, talking about governance. Hereditary, a philosophy more than it is a movie. Ari Aster knocked it out of the park, dealing with that encroaching nihilism of life. And then incest. What other podcasts would talk about these four things in an episode, Eric? That's what I want to know.
Well, I would say not even ours, because we also added the fifth thing of pirates. So, man, this episode literally has it all. If by all we mean incest, pirates, bodybuilding, nihilism, and whatever the fifth thing was. But it doesn't matter based on what I said the fourth thing was, which is nihilism.
Yeah, it actually occupies not only two spaces, but all spaces. And that is actually kind of interesting because today we talk about the tea, we talk about life lessons. We, as always, are united with a bodybuilder who then got his PhD, that then started a successful company. Maybe we're noticing a trend here, Eric, that hopefully along the way, some of that dedication and discipline that you cultivate while being a bodybuilder will lead to other things. And we have one of the true OGs in the house when it comes to nutrition. We have John Berardi joining us today on this episode.
Yep, Dr. John Berardi, one of the I wouldn't say the earliest, because it does go deep if we want to talk historically, with kind of the mentor figure. I don't mean this disparagingly in the modern form of it, but the guru, the person who spends time doing a deep dive into a nutrition or training related topic and then finds a way to share it. He was probably one of the first archetypes in the internet age of the athlete scholar, if you will, the one who did the whole competitive athlete thing, and then to reach the best level of competition they could, they became an expert in the field, and then tried to pay that forward. And that's really what this episode is about: is the value in paying it forward, the value in finding your own story arc, your superhero origin story, as JB put it in this episode. And it's just a really interesting retrospective that we got to listen to as we learned how he went from being in his young 20s as a second generation Italian immigrant to coming up in a blue collar family, to being mentored through the bodybuilding ranks, and like you said, transferring that skill set into business, and then into a business that was even counter recommended by a guidance counselor in his early days, of getting, don't become a doctor, become an exercise science person. And what are you, crazy? And then really carrying that forward to the point of, seeing precision nutrition reach an apex where it rivals some of the old guard in personal training, like the ACSM or NSCA. And then to kind of then at the very end find out what lessons has John Berardi learned from all that, and how is he trying to share it with us in his upcoming book?
Huge, beautiful, neatly summarized, Eric. I think at one point he did say essentially that bodybuilding, and the person, the gym owner, who we never found out his name, and I think obviously he wants to keep a certain level of anonymity to the individual, the gym owner that essentially saved his life. He said that bodybuilding, or that moment, saved his life. So it's just interesting how life works in general, where he was on a certain path and he wasn't even looking for salvation. It came to him. And then he used that opportunity, and now he's paying it forward. I do have a quick message that I'm hearing from our producers, Eric, that we need to issue, and that is that we want to apologize if anyone perceives in this episode a slight to any other of our contemporary podcasts or podcast hosts. Once again, the thoughts and opinions of myself and Eric do not reflect that of Iron Culture. Any perceived or real animosity to any other host of any other lifting podcast is not to be taken seriously, and once again, does not reflect the mission statement of Iron Culture.
Exactly. So without naming any names, I just want to apologize without actually admitting any culpability to Danny Lennon for no particular reason. Like I said, not naming any names. But if there is anything that offends you, Danny, just remember it has no reflection on Iron Culture. It is purely an opinion, but not an admission of guilt, by myself.
No, and sometimes if you were to point out something, Eric, that is just objective reality, then you're just pointing out objective reality. And should one attempt to argue against that, then you're arguing against reason and science. So it's either you're with us in science or you're one of the loonies. You got to make up your own mind.
And I think if Danny Lennon wants to stay on brand, he knows where he's going to fall there.
Well, I'm just glad we got that out of the way. What an episode. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. John Berardi now talking about change makers, bodybuilding, and the journey to creating precision nutrition. Welcome to another episode of Iron Culture, the podcast, the #1 podcast for the casual sapiosexual. We have 2 PhDs in the house. It's a monstrous, it's not a showdown, it's really just a congregation, a meeting of great minds, bodybuilders who would have thunk that they in fact think. We're joined by John Berardi. Now, Eric is going to do the huge intro with the academics and all sorts of things. There's 2 things I want to say, however, and that is Eric, coach, Ya Aini, as they say in Arabic, and that's a perfect translation. No, you don't need to look it up. It means what it means. He always has his degrees in the background. You know, he comes from the hip hop tradition of know your place, know your history, know where you come from, rep the block. So he has his stuff in the background. And then he also has his bodybuilding family, 3DMJ, which is very close to his heart. So it's kind of Fritz. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh John. Oh yeah. So it's like Fritz Long, where you want the head and the heart to come together. So his degrees plus his family. And then John Berardi, just in the background. We don't have it in the frame just because we have 2 people on the screen. But you best believe I saw you have one of the all-time greatest Canadian athletes, George St. Pierre, in the background, who I can only assume, of course, you've worked with him. So it's a statement of intent. It's a showdown. It's poker, and everyone has full houses and royal flushes.
That's right. And why wouldn't we? Right? People have to know. Is anyone actually going to watch this, or is everyone just...
No, people, in fact. So I'd say you're looking at maybe 5,000 souls, 5 to 10,000 souls. They'll watch it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Your hair looks great.
And
Your hair looks indeed George St. Pierre right there.
And Omar does mean souls.
My children to the right.
Oh yeah. We should mention your children too.
Yeah. We should mention your children too. And also, when Omar says souls, I just want to welcome you to the Iron Cult. Sure.
Yeah.
Because you are now a cult member and you have saved yourself a spot on the surviving ship when it all burns.
Awesome. I was wondering if it was 5,000 people.
Well,
or we're going with people plus disembodied.
Things are going to get a little complicated when everything ends, and we'll just stick with souls for now.
It's hard for them to diet those individuals, exactly. Isn't it? Figure out the right training program for those.
Yeah,
souls.
When you're just a body walking around with no head, but still powered by the soul of Paimon, it's difficult to know what your macros are or how you get them in.
Yeah,
so that's right.
Yeah, I do want Eric.
Yeah.
I just want to say...
You go ahead, buddy.
The last thing, my man, before you give the legit introduction is I have to give John a huge shout-out because he's one of the first people that I followed online that was influential in a positive way in my lifting journey. I've met John twice. I guarantee he doesn't remember either time. One was a decade ago where you were giving a talk at CanFit Pro. I first found you on T Nation. I even bought the Precision Nutrition cookbook, which, let me just say, this is a true story. When I was a bulking boy, a bulking body, loving food, your JB's chili recipe I made to the T, and it was a staple in my eating for about 2 years. Because I, much like Eric, what we spoke before, we were kind of skinny guys where we weren't particular with food growing up. So if we had a block of cheese in the house, hey, guess what? Mom and dad are out for lunch, for dinner, we'll eat the block of cheese. And so getting into that mindset and being more rigorous with our eating, that was something for me, JB's chili plus the cookbook. And then also, there's an article that was impactful to me on T Nation. And that was an article essentially more about mindset, about your bodybuilding journey. And that's why you fit right in the Iron Culture, man, where I'm paraphrasing here. But you essentially, I think it may have been university, you wanted to start training more seriously, and you met an individual that obviously was jacked, was quite strong, and he became your training partner. And the test that he gave you, where you said, "Hey, man, essentially, I want to train with you," and he said, "Sure, show up at 6 a.m." And you're like, "Oh man, like I haven't woken up that early in forever." But that was the choice right there. So I just want to say, man, it's a huge honor to have you on.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate all the kind words very, very much. And yes, the test. That was the ultimate test for me, honestly, because the shape of my life may have gone completely differently because this guy, I wasn't much of a lifter at the time. But what happened was he came up to me flailing around on a leg press machine one day, and he gave me some tips and then asked me to come train legs with him the next morning before the gym opened because he was the owner of the gym. And I was like, I'm just doing legs right now, man. And early. But he went on to become my greatest mentor, trained me in bodybuilding, also made me read books, made me go to university. Without him, I'm not here today doing what I do. So I passed the test, thankfully.
That's incredible. Just to see how you got that kind of the rope coming down into the brotherhood, sisterhood of iron. That's really cool. And
yeah. And prior to that, I was a terrible student. I was always drunk and high. I was on a really, really bad path. And that what brought me to the gym was I got into a really bad car accident. That was my wake up call. I decided not to hang out with any of the people I was hanging out with. And the interesting thing is, like, if I told the whole story, it sounds a little bit like a movie arc, right? But what you don't hear after that, like, pivotal moment is like the year of loneliness that comes after you decide, hey, I'm no longer going to cope with my emotions using alcohol and drugs. And hey, I'm not going to hang out with any of the same people anymore. So you're sitting at home with no friends and no coping mechanisms. And that's what brought me to the gym. I'm like, oh, maybe I should just find something to do with my time, go work out. And again, was super lucky. I'm just goofing around in the gym and this guy goes, hey, come here for a second. I'm going to teach you a thing or two. So it's I mean, still, it's, I don't know, many moons later, but I still get the chills talking about it. And I feel it really, really cool full circle moment. As you guys know, I just finished a new book. I got a chance to just today write him a personal card, send him off the book, just saying thank you, like 30 some years later, for all that influence back in the day. That is
very cool. And I think, I know I relate to that personally, but I know a lot of people who get into serious weight training or serious exercise of any type probably relate to that story. Yeah, like you said, in the absence of healthy coping skills, when you only have poor coping skills, there's still coping skills, and my mother, who I grew up with, she was a drug and alcohol counselor for many years, and was she would still self-identify as an addict, but she's been clean for a very, very long time. Says exactly that. Like, there's a period where you do decide to turn down that different path, but you don't have anything. Certain things have atrophied or never developed in the first place, and so developing a healthy relationship with the iron actually takes time. And I know for me, when I first started lifting, for a while, it also resembled kind of this not so healthy, self-destructive kind of relationship with the iron. I know a lot of bodybuilders and powerlifters who never quite get out of that loop, although it's certainly better than other options. So,
and the food too, right? Like I'd even extend that not only to the time spent in the gym, but time spent in the kitchen and the eating and whatever, right? And then hopefully through practice and exposure to good people and good ideas, you can actually turn this into a real positive, confidence building and life affirming thing, rather than just a replacement for a less bad vice. You
Absolutely.
know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I think by personal experience, I know that as a coach. And I also know that just as someone who's tried to intentionally evolve throughout my career. And to throw a little more props your way, that's probably one of the things I respect the most out of you. I mean, obviously, I think your accolades speak for themselves. People know you're very successful as both an athlete, a writer, a thinker, a thought promoter, and as someone who has worked with others. But what's impressed me is that when I first started engaging with your content, man, I would have been 2004, I think is when I first started getting into the lifting and learning about it. Your content has changed a lot over time. While many of your colleagues have entrenched themselves into specific ideas and made it even harder for them to update their beliefs because of a financial investment, and they just dig their heels in. Many of those folks ain't around no more, to put it simply. And I think because you're someone who has always, in my opinion, tried to get it right to the best of your ability, and made sure that you are open-minded and trying new things and being just very expressive about that. I think that's a testament to why you've been more successful and provided more value to the community. So that's just wanted to throw that shout out your way. Those who haven't listened, I'm going to even just go with that whole altruistic belief in my heart and give a props to Danny Lennon. You were just on the Sigma Nutrition Radio podcast talking about kind of quote unquote tribalism, and the big take home I got away from that podcast episode was how not getting too married to any beliefs or any groupthink kind of mentality. Of course, except for the Iron Cult, which is fine because that's the only group that'll be around in the end. It's just going to become humanity or whatever is left of it in the end. But outside of that specific example, I think it was a really good discussion.
Yeah, don't tie yourself to any belief system except for the right one.
Yes. Or not even the right one, just the one that'll have your soul,
the only one.
The only one
that's going to be left. Guaranteed to allow your soul to live on. And shout out to Danny Lennon, by the way, for his Eric and his classic, just being the apex predator that he is. Danny Lennon left a very nice comment on one of Eric's posts, saying something along the lines like, "Gent, fantastic podcast, would love to be back on." And Eric basically said, "Your desperation is showing," or something like. I forget how you said it. Eric's just that guy.
Trying to get back on.
Maybe Danny was just trying to be nice.
Oh, he absolutely was.
He's like, whatever. This is what you're supposed to say.
Yeah, Danny's a stone cold killer. Don't let him fool you. Those dead eyes when you look into him,
Those baby blues. Don't let them fool you, man.
Yeah. Biggest mistake of my life.
He's great.
Letting him stay at my house. I feared for my life every night. So Danny, if you're out there, you're not coming back because I want to live. Yeah. So.
You're like, your words sound nice enough.
There's nothing behind them except for. Oh, it's so funny because anyone who knows Danny, he's like the nicest man on the planet. So it's great.
But that's what's so suspicious about him, right? No,
that's the suspicious part.
Thoughtful. That's right. No one could be so genuine and authentic and thoughtful
without planning. Every eye twitch and micro facial thing to mimic a real human. Right. Yeah.
His most compassionate work comes after burying a recent body.
Yes, it's how I get in touch with what humans need is by literally digging deep into their chest cavity. Yeah. All right. So after that lovely tangent, John.
Danny's not sure how to feel about
Danny,
this.
Now for the record, does not want to be back on the podcast. Before that tangent, he was excited. Now he's like, F those guys.
Yeah, and one-time guest for sure. Yeah.
Yes, and I'll never get back on either. So his podcast.
Just to have an awkward intro, we will avoid that. Yeah. So John, I would love to hear from the horse's mouth a bit of your story, kind of what initially got you into the quote unquote industry, if you will, and then I'm sure we'll have questions along the way because I find it very interesting. But as I just want to pay you the homage that's due as someone who has pursued the highest level of academics, who's been competitive in the iron game, and then who's tried to pay that forward, and who has constantly tried to update your beliefs and put the best value out there. Obviously, I followed a very similar career trajectory, and if it wasn't for folks like you, that's because it's not exactly no one. Your career guidance counselor when you're 12 doesn't go, Well, I think a bodybuilding science communicator is probably going to be the pathway for you based on your test scores. So I just want to give props to you as being probably one
Yeah.
of the first generation since the internet of someone who kind of showed a guy like me that there's a pathway forward. And so thank you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And as folks have written about, a lot of this comes down to timing, right? Like it just so happened that the internet became a thing, right? When I was becoming a thing myself, you know what I mean? Like the people prior to me, when I watched their careers, they just had to be on the road, 50 out of 52 weeks. Many of them were estranged from their partners and their families, and the whole thing was being on the road. And I'm a big introvert. I don't like being on the road at all. I travel like 2, 3 times a year maximum. So I looked at that and I was like, I can't possibly be successful on those terms. Like I can't use my degree. I can't, but thankfully, my earliest sort of business partner as we started down this road, he came from a systems design engineering background. So he was creating web interfaces for IBM and other big companies at the time. And he was like, the internet's going to be a real thing now, and as we were joking before we started, like in the early days, you'd like load up a T Nation article on dial up and wait 15 minutes, like reading another book while you're waiting for an article to load, you know? And so when he was like, we need to start a website for you, man. I was like, yeah, that'll never work. The visionary that I was.
Websites aren't a thing.
Yeah, inside of 2 years. So I think probably I was one of just a few, like quote unquote experts with their own website back at that time. It's so weird thinking back because nowadays, you look at someone's sign off on their email and you've got their 6 websites, their 18 social media handles, like you can find me anywhere you look. Just look outside. I'm in your bushes right now. But
the Danny Lennon approach. I'm so sorry. I like him a lot too. That's the problem.
And back then, like it was a big deal to get a website, so, but to your question, for me, it started back with the story we told earlier. This guy literally sort of pulled me up out of the muck of my own making, and every day, like he was the owner of a few gyms in our town, and he was a bodybuilder and a competitive power lifter, and I showed up at that workout. I guess I worked hard. I still to this day don't know what was in it for him. Although as I get older, I'm learning a bit more that, hey, once you have figured out some things in your life, you want to teach them to like someone eager to learn. That's the reward. You know what I mean? You find someone who's like committed and eager and like shows you something that they're going to put it into good use, this thing that you've learned. And then you're like, that's the reward right there. So I kind of get it now a bit more. But, he gave me a job at the gym. He taught me how to lift properly. And we ended up competing in the NABA USA contest in 1995 together. I was in the junior category and he was in the men's open. But after every workout, and he used to crush me, like he had all those years of, building capacity. So he could do like high volume training. And I just remember like, I'd get done these 2-hour workouts and I just go home and I have to like draw the blinds and I just lay in my bedroom for hours. I was so like sympathetically overstimulated. And I was like overtraining or whatever you want to call it. And then I had to go back the next day and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I was like all these primitive recovery mechanisms I'm using in 1990, whatever. And then he'd give me books to read, right? So philosophy and self-help and all this kind of stuff. So honestly, for me, it just, the rest of my life became about sort of paying that forward, So then he made me promise. He's like, I'll train you. We'll do all this great stuff together, but you have to promise to go get an education. So then I started at community college and then got very serious about school at that point, and basically got A's for the whole rest of my journey when I was a D student in high school. And then, but you mentioned the guidance counselor thing. It was actually probably a guidance counselor that put the first chip on my shoulder professionally, because after I did community college and I went to university and I was trying to figure out my major and stuff, and I told him the kinds of things I was interested in. I'm like, oh, I love strength training. I maybe want to be a strength coach one day. And he's like, ah, that's not for you. You know, he's like, there's too few jobs, and the chances that you're going to get one of them are almost none. So we need to think practically here. And for a guy like me, that was just like, it like filled up my backpack of angst for a good 10 years. You know what I mean? I was like, ah, I'm going to show this guy. So then my academic journey was just about learning all the things, you know, that I was really deeply interested in. I did philosophy because I dug that. I did psychology, and I'm like, let's do some sports psychology, and then pre-med. And but I remember, like, it was hilarious because my whole relationship to undergrad anyway was, I'm just going to learn the things that I need to know to like build my body and help other people build theirs, but mostly mine. So I still to this day am pretty terrible at female physiology, because whenever they would lecture on that, I'd be like, ah, who gives a shit? That's not going to help me in any way. So that was kind of my journey, you know. And then by the time I got to grad school, I started paying attention to all the things. But you know, and then that's when I sort of got my first start coaching people. You know, I went to Canada for my PhD program, and right around then is when I started writing for T Nation. So you know, I was learning all this cool stuff in the lab, and I've always been a decent writer and communicator. So it was like, all right, cool. I'm going to take one day a week and I'm going to bury myself in the literature, which was like in the basement of our library. There's no online, right? So I don't know if you guys ever experienced this in your career, but you go down to the stacks. So it's the basement of the library, and like the first 6 months of your favorite journal was bound together. And, you know, it's super out of date, kind of like textbooks are nowadays. They're like behind the research a little bit. Well, that's what even journals were back then. Like, you got them some weeks or even maybe months after they'd been published, and or the studies had been done for sure. And I would spend all day Thursday down there, like, what's cool, what's new, and I'd write about it, you know. So it was kind of like I was doing this stuff for academia and then just moonlighting in like sharing this widely. And then I was doing coaching and stuff like that. So that was really the early days. It was just about like, you know, learning and then teaching what I was learning. And it was fun. I mean, now in retrospect, I realized I was missing some components of experience and wisdom. And, you know, I was doing what now annoys me, which is like learn on Tuesday, teach on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. You know, and you see that all over the internet nowadays. You know, you're like, this person isn't old enough to teach this. You know what I mean? And it's not a knock on age, it's a knock on just experience and wisdom. Like, if you just learned it, you need to figure out where it fits in the broader context of knowledge, you know, whether that even matters. You know, I was on a podcast recently and someone was asking me about foods that can speed up your metabolism. And I'm like, okay, there's an answer to that question, but I need to put it in context first. You know, like, I can give you a list of some foods that may speed up metabolism, and they don't matter at all. Like, the research shows they can give you a boost of X percent in your total daily energy expenditure, but it's irrelevant. It's like taking a little dropper of red dye and dropping it into the ocean. You're like, hey, the ocean increased its redness by 0.0000003%. Statistically significant. But it doesn't matter, you know, because these other variables are way more important, you know. And that's the problem with teach on Tuesday, or learn on Tuesday, teach on Wednesday, right? You don't know whether you're holding like one drop of red dye over the ocean or whether you're holding it over a tiny cup, you know. And so that's what I was doing. And now I've learned, thankfully. And then after that, um, I was just really thinking a lot about how do we reach the broadest group. And again, it's not for scalability or any of that. It was just because the internet was coming, right? And it was like, man, like 1 year ago, to get out your message, you would have to fly to Australia or fly to England or fly to Washington State or whatever and talk to 100 people. Just publishing articles on our website, we had collected a newsletter list of 30,000 people. So I'm like, every Friday I send a message to 30,000 people. It seems silly to get on an airplane to go talk to 100. Like, how can we leverage this, in a more impactful way, And I mean, like you, I was super passionate about nutrition, and there was really no one doing that game. Everyone who was like famous in our industry were kind of strength coaches or whatever. They were movement people, and I was really passionate about that as well. That was remember, that's the first thing I told the guidance counselor I wanted to do. And he's like, that'll never work, but it became, nutrition grew as my passion. And then I also realized, oh, wow, instead of competing with all these other people, they can be my market. You know what I mean? Like, all these folks can come to me for this kind of stuff. And, as you've learned, it helps when you get an advanced degree. It doesn't make your knowledge unimpeachable, but it certainly kicks open a lot of doors that might not have otherwise opened. And then once you're in, you have to have good information and be a cool person so you can get invited back. You know what I mean? So that was really it, and then there came a point where we were coaching people online. And again, I think we had one of the first ever sort of scaling sort of online coaching practices. And I remember being called out to a company that was providing a whole different kind of education for another industry. And they showed me what they were doing. And I was like, we could totally do this in lifestyle coaching. No one's ever done that before. And so that was when the very first coaching program began at Precision Nutrition, where we worked with small groups, and then it eventually became very large groups. To date, I think we've coached 200,000 people. It's, most people think of us as nutrition, but it's really movement plus food plus sleep and stress management, and sort of self-management generally. And so then that really took off. And again, we had like what people in business call first mover advantage on a lot of these things, sort of first expert website, first newsletter, first online coaching, group coaching program. And then as that got more and more successful, coaches kept asking, like, can you teach us your system? And that's when the PN certification was sort of first envisioned. And then again, we published that when literally every personal training organization in the world said, don't talk about nutrition with your clients, and people thought I was super dumb for writing that first textbook. Like, no one will ever buy this. Everyone's not allowed to use it, and I'm like, no, but this is, I got to know Gray Cook at the time. And for those of you who don't know Gray, he started the Functional Movement Screen. And that was like a really good analog, because he was like maybe 5-8 years sooner. So you basically have this guy from the physical therapy world who starts introducing physical therapy stuff to trainers, strength coaches, and literally the same thing happened. Every organization is like, you can't do that here. And all the coaches are like, we need to do that here. And he's getting cease and desist letters from lobbying groups for physical therapy associations and stuff. So as this is happening on the nutrition front, I'm like, hey, Gray, did this ever? He's like, oh, yeah, this is exactly what happened. So I'm like, oh, great. We have the exact same story arc happening right now, like 8 years later, in what I think is the next thing, right? So, PN certification now has gone on to, over 100,000 students. I learned this recently, which was really surprising and exciting. Like, PN right now, certification business is bigger than ACSM plus NSCA put together right now.
That's insane.
Wow. So I know, I was like, what? That can't be true. Like, those were things when I was like just getting into the field. So that's kind of the PN trajectory. And then sort of the last thing in that process was we had this huge coaching program that was making a big difference. And then we had this certification program putting the two together. So we created software called Pro Coach that allows our certified professionals to use our curriculum and our software to coach their clients with them as the coach. And so that's sort of really rocketed things into the stratosphere because, now the reach isn't just the people we can reach, but it's the reach of all 100,000 of those coaches into their own communities. So it just became such a cool thing. And, PN has 160 team members now. So I can't take credit for this. It really has been a phenomenal team effort with some really, really smart people and folks like Brian St. Pierre and Krista Scott Dixon and others who are Adam Fight, who are just doing tremendous education and helping create that curriculum. I could have done none of that on my own. So that's kind of the trajectory. And then in 2017, Phil and I, who started the company, were realizing it was just getting too big for us to manage. Like when you could sell everything you own in the entire world and still not cover half a month's payroll for your company, it's like treacherous, and nothing ever went wrong. But if it did, we couldn't keep the company alive. And so then we went out looking well, actually, we didn't go out looking. They came looking for us. And then once people started asking, we decided, let's check this out. So then we ended up finding a big private equity partner to come in. So a company out of Boston, a $5 billion private equity fund, bought most of the ownership of PN. We put in a great leadership team and all that. So nowadays, my focus is on some other things, but that's kind of been the path to today.
That's quite a cool story. I mean, to go from being in the junior class in the on the NABA bodybuilding stage to contacting an equity company to handle your business, which has grown too big. I want to know.
Well, I suspect you guys. I suspect you guys share some of this weirdness that is me. Like, it's really fun to subvert expectations. You know what I mean? Like you walk into a room and you look muscular, and then everyone has a set of presuppositions about who you're going to be. And then you're like, oh, well, I have a PhD. And they're like, what? And then, or like, you're a personal, like people just, to this day, continue to presume I'm a personal trainer, right? And I'm not going to correct them and be like, no, actually, let me tell you about my big business or whatever. I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, something like that, but I find that you don't find folks who lift heavy things in competitions or show their body on a stage and go and get advanced degrees and decide to start businesses and who don't relish in subverting expectations. You know what I mean? So this is what I kind of delight in.
Well, there's Saul, John Saul Orwell, who examine.com. He has those meetups where that's where I met your buddy Phil Caravaggio. Yeah, at one of the dinners. But what I like to do with some of them, because it's not fitness people, it's just entrepreneurs coming together in Toronto. Cool. I used to explain over time what I did. You go around the table and everyone's like this. I'm in fashion. I'm in the film industry. I'm trying to, build the first website that caters to, a certain demographic. Cool. You go down. And then kind of the same idea where they take a look at you or maybe the way that you dress, where I like to dress more casually. Other people are all done up because this is an entrepreneur dinner, I just started saying at these things when we would mix around that I'm actually currently unemployed, not seeking employment. Is the thing I would just say to people. So I just like walk around where they say like, oh, hey, like you're supposed to meet and socialize. And everyone's talking about, their next big, everyone wants to talk about the next big business idea. So I'm like, oh, I'm unemployed, currently not seeking employment. And then it just stopped. Then their conversation goes from like pitching you on their next big idea to like, got to find the next target. And I love it.
And you can find out who actually wants to talk and treat you like a human when you do that.
Or dialogue, rather than just pitch. I know it's just so some of these events are fun. I met amazing people there, and other times it's hilarious because I remember I was in an event not unlike the one you described, and a woman came over and she was so like aggressively trying to impress me with how rich she was. She had just sold a business for X number of dollars, and she just kept telling me like, "Can you imagine what would you do if you had this much like?" And I wasn't going to like, disabuse her of the notion that she was like superior to me, but I had just sold my mine for 20 times the value that she was just like, imagine if you were as rich as me. you know? And so I like your line because it actually would just preclude any of that conversation. You know what I mean? You would have never even had to
Shuts it
hear
down.
like,
Oh
go
yeah,
on.
yeah. She'd be like, oh well, nice chatting with you, and then go on to the next one.
Yeah, that's right.
You're not going to give me the feeling
So
I
you won't
want,
be
so let me
investing in
find
my
someone
next
else.
Yeah.
Man, that's funny. No, I definitely relate to that. Well, let's just put it this way. I did an enlistment in the Air Force. I very much valued what I got out of it, but I knew it was not the place for me, for someone who was looking for autonomy. And certainly if a guidance counselor had told me, going out there and coaching and working with bodybuilders is not a viable career, that probably would have just been an accelerant in my gas tank as well. So I can totally understand that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. There were two big ones in my career. The second was I applied for an internship at the end of my undergrad at the
Oh,
USOC.
wow.
And so the guy who wrote my letter of recommendation had written one for a student like 5 years early, same university. And that student got it, and his letter was like, this guy's way stronger than the one I recommended before, who you accepted. So I was like, oh, I'm a shoo-in. And I got the rejection letter, and I was like, I'll be back, So I remember the day I went and did some coaching at the USOC. And I told freaking everyone that I met, I'm like, I got turned down for an internship here. Look at me now.
That's awesome.
Thankfully, I've grown up. This is one thing. I was doing a fireside chat recently, and that's one of the biggest things that's been like pleasing in this portion of my career. And I was able to take that backpack of grievances off, set it down, and like no longer need it in my life. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like I don't have to hold on to these things that I think are the necessary fuel for accomplishment. There's other motivators that aren't, I'll show those assholes. You know what I mean? And those other motivators are better and more life affirming.
Yeah, I think they also result in a higher quality value that you can give to others. I think so.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about this on Iron Culture, how your ego can very much be a double-edged sword. It can, like we talked about,
Yeah.
it can be your initial fuel tank to change the trajectory of your life, to get you into, a job at the USOC in your case, or a doctoral program, or get you on stage. But if that becomes kind of the more dominant fuel, it starts to damage the engine, and that car gets limited in its reach and extent and range. The lifespan comes down, and eventually you are limiting yourself in what you can produce, and it becomes the enemy, as is a very popular book title. So
Yeah, completely. It also like damages a whole bunch of relationships and stuff, like for when I was walking around that guy, like my elbows were up all the time. I was just looking for things that were going to get in my way, and I had to throw elbows to make space for this thing. You know what I mean? That I was doing. And so like I realized when I set that thing down, that backpack down, I was like, oh wow, you don't even know you're carrying it, but when you set it down, you feel lighter, and then you're like, oh wow, I'm more open for like the metaphorical embrace. You know what I mean? Which is relationships, and it's embracing new things, and just being a nicer person. Like if nothing more. So. Yeah, I agree that it does. There's some corrosion that happens for sure. But this is part of the thing I think about a lot. If we do binary thinking here and go, don't use grudge as fuel, well, maybe there's a time where that's appropriate. Like maybe at a certain point in your career, that is the only thing that you've got. However, know that that's what you're using and know that you can also set it down when the time is right to move on from that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think I have made the binary mistake of going, oh, I don't want to be fueled by ego. That doesn't match my values. I'm someone, I want to be an altruistic person. I want to help others. I want to leave it better than I found that. I want to pay it forward. And I try to ignore or deny the part of me who wants to be the baddest nutrition guru on the planet, or I want to deny the guy, the person in me. I've experienced this last competition season because I'm still an avid athlete. I was like, I just compete for the experience and the holistic development. And then I kind of subverted the part of me who's like, I also want to win,
Yeah.
And by not paying heed to that and trying to not acknowledge it, it kind of grows in the darkness, like a fungus, So, and then when
it comes out by mocking Danny.
Exactly, and then I got to take it out on Danny Lennon.
Harmless individuals that can't even defend themselves. That's what we do at Iron Culture.
Yes, so exactly right. But I think in all seriousness, it comes out sideways in some way. It surprises you, and unfortunately, can surprise others. And so now I think what I've come to realize multiple times is that you are who you are, and that's a conglomeration of experiences and emotional wiring, and what makes you a quote unquote good person or bad person is the choices you make. Given that wiring, not just like Danny's a good person because he chooses only to, kill like Dexter, the bad people.
As far as we know, yeah.
As far as we know, like he's hidden any good people he's killed well enough. So, but no, in all seriousness, like I make the decision to use that ego fuel, quote unquote, to push me towards things that will have value, that do pay it forward, that match my values, my belief system, etc. Rather than trying to deny it. Like a good parallel is that courage isn't the absence of fear; it's action in the face of fear. It's kind of saying, hey, like you feel what you feel, you are who you are, but what are you going to do about it? And I think when that, at least my perspective is that when that fuel tank is completely full with in this case, the example is ego, there's just not a lot of options. There's not much more you can do than be the egotistical guy. So getting, more multiple fuels, or just like you said, I think the critical piece is self-awareness, knowing what's going into your gas tank.
Well, that's really it, and this is a universal thing. Like we think about this idea of like optionality, right? Well, how do you get optionality? Well, you need awareness of what all the options are. You need awareness of which one you're gravitating towards most naturally, right? So now here we're talking about like ego and like, individual things, but like we can talk about nutrition the same way, right? Is intermittent fasting good or bad? Do I need to eat breakfast? Good or bad? Well, all of these are options, so having optionality is awesome. Let's know how they work and let's make a thoughtful choice based on our inclinations and, what can work and what the internally consistent system is for that working. And the same goes with different modes of training, and the same goes with relationships. It's just true that the more aware you are of your proclivities and then the options that are out there for you, now you just make a thoughtful choice in a judgment kind of free way rather than this is good, this is bad.
I think a brilliant analogy is one that Eric made concerning bodybuilding, and just the idea where you say optionality, John. People like to think in that dichotomy of good and bad. And so it'll be the idea, let's say, ego, is it good or bad? Well, it's always bad. The same now these days with more body awareness when it comes to lifters and just individuals in general, you bring up bodybuilding to those outside of bodybuilding. So they would put forth, you know, it leads to body dysmorphias, orthorexia. They'll list all these problems, all these negatives, and their some conclusion of it is bodybuilding's net bad, right? And then Eric made the great analogy about bodybuilding, that bodybuilding is an option like anything else, and that there's pros and cons, and it's much more like something along the lines of football, where people might say in the media or in general, you know, football concussions is terrible, no one should be doing it. But then the idea of learning your place, your position, teamwork, fostering a sense of self-worth, the dedication, the discipline that you cultivate from years spent practicing early at 6 a.m. These are some massive positives. So it's in the end kind of about informed consent or informed choice of when you choose to use these things.
Yeah, I agree. That is a good analogy, and it's as a grown up, like this is what nuance means. This is where you go, okay, cool, football bad. All right, if I didn't, like maybe it is, but let's say for the sake of argument that it's not. What would be not bad about it? What would be good about it? And this is where optionality comes in. You could go, hey, is there something I can do to foster all those skills you just mentioned without knocking my brain around inside the skull? You know what I mean? Like, cool, could we create that thing? This is what gives you optionality, right? Seeing what all the pros and cons are of everything, because everything has them. Everything has trade-offs. If I decide to do X with my time, it means I can't do Y. And then going, okay, cool. How do I get more of the things I want, and less of the things I don't want? All right, let me create that life. Let me create that nutrition plan. Let me create that training plan. Let me create that as a fuel for my bodybuilding accomplishment, whatever.
So you've done a pretty damn good job of creating that life for yourself. That was kind of the thing that I was marveling at in hearing your story. I wonder, because I've thought about this myself, like how much backwards explaining and rationalizing do I do? Like, oh, this all led me to here, and I planned this, versus how much was just like you said, timing or falling into it. Like when you were getting on the bodybuilding stage to compete, did you have it in your mind like, oh, I would love to start my own company one day?
No, I mean, I come from an immigrant family. My parents both came from Italy on the boat, they were on a boat, and they grew up without education in a small farming village with no running water, electricity. And, I grew up living over a garage. We were whatever, quote unquote, poor, whatever that means. Growing up. So for me, none of this is on the expectation plan. I grew up around very blue collar people, working really, really, really hard without the things that the internet tells you all that hustle is going to lead to. You know what I mean? Like nowadays when people just really like worship at the altar of grind and hustle, I'm like, I don't know. I have a different experience of that, man. I grew up around some of the hardest working people I've ever known. And they never got these rich rewards at the other end of hustle. They were like lower than median levels of income. Now for a lot of them, it was fine, right? Like they were either escaping abject poverty or persecution or death. So they're like, this is great right now. You know what I mean? Even though we're poor. So, for me, that was all my early influences. The one thing that I think's been fun in my life is that I started learning about the idea of like doing 5-year plans or whatever when I was 19. Something about them never resonated with me, so I never really did them. And now in retrospect, I'm super happy I didn't. I don't think I would like heroically rejected them or whatever. But what I realize is that I'm a super focused person, and that if I would have had a 5-year plan, I would have stuck to it. And many of the things that I've experienced in my life have come as like side paths, detours from what I would have been doing if I would have made that plan. I often make an analogy to dating, it only seems reasonable if I like meet a woman, let's say at a coffee shop or a And I don't. I've been married for a long time. I have 4 kids. I don't meet any women ever. But if I were to, and I'd be single, like we might have a conversation. And at the end of that conversation, I might ask, like, hey, would I like to have another conversation rather than rush into like, hey, we should start planning the wedding. And then you have another conversation. And then maybe after that, you decide, hey, like maybe for this next one, we'll meet up, and have that conversation intentionally. Oh, maybe the next one we'll go on a date. And if that goes well, so it's just try a little bit of this, just a tiny bit more than last time. See if it's good. And did we like it? Did you like it? Did I like it? Is it good? Okay, cool. Should we try just a little bit more? No is a fine answer. And you just keep doing that over and over again. And that's what my career's been. I did a pre-med degree, and I was like, I'm going to go to med school. And I was like, why? Why am I going to go to med school? Oh, because I think it's going to be a hard challenge. And I still got that backpack of grievances. I got people to show that I can do this. Right. Number two, you grow up in an immigrant family, being a doctor or a lawyer is a thing, like you got to do one of those two to have respect. My parents were fond of saying, like, listing the things constantly that they can never take away from you, and I used to be like, why are they always telling me this? They can't take education away from you. And I'm like, oh, I get it now. Because
You're like, who's they?
Yeah, exactly. If you grew up in like World War II Italy, people came and took shit away from you. They really did. So I'm like, oh, I get it. This is what, so, living up to some family expectation, proving a whole bunch of people wrong, and then like, the challenge. But then I realized I don't think I want to do any of this. I just like exercise science and nutrition. So like when I turned down med school to go do a master's in exercise science, people are like, you're nuts. Like, the exercise science plant isn't hiring. You know what I mean? Have either of you guys read the book Range yet? By David Epstein. He's the guy who wrote The Sports Gene. Range is one of my top books of the last 5 years. In it, he argues, I think pretty convincingly, that we know this in sport, like early specialization isn't the path probably to long-term athletic success, certainly not long-term love of sport. Yeah. But he extends that beyond sport into almost every endeavor. He kind of undercuts the media's fascination for these like singular stories based on either early specialization or deep specialization. I mean, we love to find people who like excelled at a thing, committed 10,000 hours and went and crushed it, And we don't really celebrate the people who look like they were kind of meandering for the first 20 or 30 years of their life, 40 years of their life, and then figured out a thing. But his whole argument, and there's loads of data to support it, is that these make some of the most interesting, some of the most accomplished, creative people, and also may be the kind of people that will be required for the future. Deep information set is less special because information is so ubiquitous now, right? Like to make an innovation in Boston pre-information sharing age, like you needed a local expert, right, who had that expertise in physics or science or whatever it was, right? Nowadays, maybe you only need one in the whole world because we can get access to their data so quickly and easily. What you need then is a bunch of generalists who know where to put that information in the context of the new problems that we have to solve. He calls them kind versus wicked world problems. So a kind world problem in learning would be like becoming a master in chess. Chess has a certain number of moves you can do. The rules are always fixed, and there's immediate feedback that you get when you do those moves. That's a kind learning situation. A wicked learning situation is being involved in something where you don't know the rules. The rules change often, and feedback is delayed so that you're learning a bunch of stuff along the way, but a lot of it could be superstition. And I often draw that back to what we do for a living, right? Like nutrition and dieting is a wicked world learning problem Like if you're trying to diet, you don't get immediate feedback, right? It's a little bit delayed. And that's why I have a lot of compassion for people who maybe draw the wrong conclusions about what happened when they tried keto or any kind of diet, why they don't get that it's just calorie deficit that leads to weight loss, because they did something. The results took a while to come. They don't actually know the rules. The rules are changing, which they are, like your metabolism does adapt to some degree when calories go up or calories go down. And so it's total wicked world learning situations. So anyway, that book is fascinating, one of my favorites, and I've been recommending it to everyone because of this idea of, you and I having PhDs, people would presume we're the first, like specialists, you know what I mean? But then it's like, no, I mean, I did go deep on that thing, but I also do these 18 other things that people don't quite understand how it all fits together. But here we are, like making a podcast that a lot of people want to listen to.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I will definitely give a look at that book because when you said early specialization, I couldn't help but think I'm currently rereading Rousseau's The Social Contract, and he just has a remark in it where he says that essentially that an early child prodigy in any discipline amounts to nothing. It's just a remark that he makes amongst 130 pages, and then he goes on about it as it relates to the social system as a whole. But it's interesting that through his observations at that time 200 plus years ago, and then hearing just a little bit about that, it reminded me what you're talking about, early and deep specialization. So I'll for sure check it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Epstein talks a lot about the Tiger Woods story, which is the one that's constantly championed. But you hear these in all different contexts. A piano prodigy. We want to find like a little kid who can do a thing better than adults, right? And we want to celebrate them, right? And we want to look for like something special that they had, And again, you can, and 10,000 hours probably works for these kind learning environments. You know what I mean? Where it's playing the piano, the rules don't change. Playing chess, golf, the rules don't change. Feedback's immediate in all these domains, right? But most of the rest of life isn't like that. So we can't use the same model that works in this very specific slice of achievement to every other kind of achievement. Because what it does is then just makes us feel bad. You know what I mean? Ultimately, it just makes us feel bad. And then we lionize the wrong traits. You know what I mean? You start trying to develop these traits over here for this thing when those traits are irrelevant here,
Yeah. It's cool to see where my question took us, that I think having a way of being open-minded to the future, but having either a passion to fall back on or kind of maybe a mission statement, but not some kind of structured plan, seems to be important to me,
Yeah.
I look at my own career trajectory
Totally.
I knew where I wanted to get, but because I think just my natural personality, being a big picture thinker, a quote unquote kind of visionary role I play in most of the businesses I'm part of or groups, but not necessarily let me get from A to B to C to D to E. I've learned to do that. You can't get through academia if you can't connect the dots. But my natural position as a young kid is be like, oh, bodybuilding is awesome. I want to do something in that vein. Okay, and then being relatively self-aware for the age I was at the time, like what really gets me going in the morning? What do I like? What do I not like? Okay, so I don't want to do something I don't like, and I want it to be related to bodybuilding, and that'll be my filter. And those were broad enough that I could assess opportunities as they came my way, and ones that wouldn't, like you said, take me down I would argue that the pre-med and the becoming a doctor was kind of like a red herring. It fed a lot of certain aspects of what you believed you should be. And I think a lot of people in our society, depending on how loud their own internal voices are, how much they're going to respect or value their own internal voice, and how much other voices come to them, parents, siblings, or sometimes pure necessity, where they don't have the luxury of being able to follow a passion or don't believe they do. And then what their personality is like. Are there someone who is fearful and highly pragmatic and has a loud social voice or social influence? That's the type of person who I think wakes up, 15 years of being, after they got their degree in communications and while they might be successful, they're not happy, you know.
Yeah. And this, I mean, in the new book, like I have a framework, and it plays with this dynamic tension that you're bringing up, which is, the framework is, okay, how do you embark on a career with a high probability of, success? And I might define success by some kind of Venn diagram overlap of, making enough money to afford the things that you want, knowing whether the things that you want are the right things for you, happiness, contentment, etc. And so, like, we begin with these kind of three tiers, help people unpack their purpose. It usually starts with like their superhero origin story, like how did health and fitness, like how did you get bit by the, health and fitness spider that turned you into like, health and fitness Spider-Man or Spider-Woman. Like, I think you have to start there. That's not your purpose, but you have to begin there. Mine was that day on the leg press machine and the subsequent years of mentorship. Like, why did I decide? Like, I probably could have done well in other fields than this, right? So why here? Well, because this dude kind of saved my life, and I'm like, all right, well, this is it. I'm going to do this now. So then you take that origin story and you turn it into a purpose. And we have like a host of questions. We ask people to help them really unpack that. You articulated yours really nicely, like, so you're like a bodybuilding, and then use these other couple things that I seem to enjoy. So then we help people define that purpose. And then from there, it's like work on your unique abilities. What are and unique abilities I define as the thing that you have the ability to be world-class at. It's number one. Number two is the thing from that sphere that you like, because I'm good at some stuff I don't like doing, And then the third is the things among those that have the ability to move the needle on whatever metric of success that you are after, whether it's financial success or big outreach or changing lives or, certain kind of lifestyle. So it's like, and then how they map together. Unique abilities are the tools you use to serve your purpose, right? Like, I see so many people go into this field, health and fitness, just assuming that coaching is what you have to do, and I'm like, there are so many, like, no, you should not all be coaches. And then they're like, oh crap, I can't go out of coaching, like, because I just end up working for the man. So I'm going to be the man. Now they're going to be entrepreneurs, right? I'm like, no, that's really bad for a lot of you. You know what I mean? So there's all these other paths. And how do you choose them? Well, you have to figure out what your purpose is and then layer on your unique abilities, right? I do a little bit of coaching for various businesses in like informal ways. And a friend was like, all right, PN's content creation machine is kind of second to none. Teach me how to create that for our business. PN's blog, like the articles that PM publishes, get 2-3 million visitors a month. When we did the intermittent fasting book that we published for free on the internet, now that's had 6 million readers. So our content's pretty widely distributed. So folks are like, how do we create that, right? And so I looked around. I'm like, I can teach you how we did it, but part of the problem is I don't see anyone in your organization that's doing it already. That's like doing content like naturally. Like, you don't understand. This isn't just a business opportunity for me. It's kind of a disease. Like, I would be doing this if no one paid me, for sure. I was doing it before anyone ever paid me. Like, I first started reading Muscle Media 2000, way back when. I would draft my own articles for that I would never submit to them because I was too young and not there yet. Like, I was wasting my time doing this well before there was anything to do, So I'm like, no one in your company is doing that. But what you are doing is these other things instead. So we need to ride the horses in the direction that they're already going. That's where you look at unique abilities. So I'm like, you and the folks in your company are great on the microphone and you're great on camera. So rather than trying to do long form written content like PN, you have to get as good as PN is at that with your unique abilities, what you do. And then, so that's just an example, but then we just layer one more part, which is like values, right? So I feel like if you're lucky enough to be working towards your purpose with your unique abilities, you need some guardrails. like one, to prevent you from working all the time. Two, to have a sense for like how to focus your energies. Cause if you're that good doing stuff that's in your purpose, you're going to get lots of opportunities. So then how do you govern your choice of which opportunity? Well, that's your value system, right? So this is how I help coach people explicitly to do this. We discover your purpose, figure out what unique abilities you'll use to serve that, and then we create the boundaries of your values. Um, but the fascinating thing is, as you mentioned, like it also is fluid. And I think you have to revisit it every so often. Probably in the beginning more often, probably later in your career a little less often, but still you'll revisit it regularly with the knowledge that it may change because you're changing all and external conditions are changing. So, as we talk about how to sort of craft the life that you want, I think it begins with something really explicit like this, purpose, unique abilities, values, exercise, and then regularly touching back and being like, okay, cool. Has anything changed? Well, what do I have to revise? What have I gotten better at? Etc. And then you just keep doing this until you die. Repeat until death.
That's awesome.
And for me, it's a way to like it's no guarantee of success, but it's a way to increase the probability of it actually working out.
Yeah, and I mean, it at the very least, because I think back to when I was writing, I had a monthly Q&A blog on the 3D Muscle Journey website back from 2009 through 2011, I think, when we were still on our YOLA website. There had to have been maybe 5 people who read that. And I would faithfully get it out every month. No, they're not available anymore, and that is on purpose. It's for anyone listening.
Wayback Machine. Look them up on the Wayback Machine.
Because they weren't good, But for me at the time, they were my best shot. So I was doing that faithfully, diligently, and was I successful by any metric? Do I even think that those articles specifically, or can I draw the line of how those got me to higher level of success now? No. But like you said, I enjoyed the hell out of it. And it was what I was going to be doing regardless. So I think at the very least, by going through the process you're describing, you're going to be happy and you're going to be doing something that gets you excited. And that's the only time when I think success can reliably happen, is when you're in a position where you're passionate, you're motivated every day, you're doing something you love, and you have a direction. And I think that's where eventually something will, if it's going to happen, that's the environment it'll happen in, where you can capitalize on it.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead.
And I would extend it even further and say, if you're in the context of an organization doing that work, like it's even better if the person to your left and the person to your right is also operating to their purpose with their unique abilities and their value systems, and some of that's shared and some of that's unique. One of the best things about PN has historically been its culture, and it continues to be. And part of it is we do this for every team member. We go through purpose, unique ability, and value. And I just say, imagine like working in a place where you look around and every single person is working at the thing that they're world class at or will be soon, that they love doing, and that has a chance to make a difference. And you're doing that, they're doing that. The synergies are great. The culture and the value share is great. Phil, our co-founder, has said this many times, like nothing worth doing can be done alone. And I think it's a great throwaway, but it's also true. Like great, meaningful, impactful work doesn't get done alone in any context. Like I just wrote this book, right? And my name is on the cover. It was by John Berardi, right? But like the myth of authorship is kind of laughable. You know what I mean? Like the number of people that had input in creating that book, it's a lot of people. Many directly, loads indirectly. You know what I mean? So just know, like when you're trying to do something great, like there's very few markers of success that end with you standing alone. You know what I mean? Whether it's relational success, business success, financial success, none of them end with the individual hero did it all by themselves and are standing alone, right? Not only wouldn't that be gratifying, but it's not reasonable, realistic. So then it's just like, cool. How do I pick the people who are going to be around me to be in the same space that we're talking about here? Purpose, unique abilities, values, right? Like you get that fulfillment, and then you're elbow to elbow with people who are doing the same. It's a great feeling.
What's kind of cool is, as you're talking about it, is it sounds like we have these babies in a long career that we give birth to. You know, like like 3D Muscle Journey, for example, the first baby that I created with my colleagues, and like you were saying, it doesn't exist without that collaboration. And while I have created things that have my name on them, since that, they're all children of my children. And I guess that's where this analogy gets a little gross when your kids are giving birth to their own kids.
Eric, don't do it, man. You did it last time where you talked about drowning 4-year-old babies in the English Canal. Well, how are we back here again, man?
We're not going to go there. But it might be a little incestuous, but all the babies will live and grow into beautiful things.
Okay.
That's what we're going to get with this story. See? So,
all right, that's my kind of episode.
It's just kind of like, the royalty from back in the day. You just keep it in the family, right? So it sounds like to me like precision nutrition was this thing that grew into this huge, successful, organic thing that became the collaboration of hundreds of people. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but your experiences in trying to help each one of the members of that quote unquote family find fulfillment and find a place and be effective in the business is kind of what gave you the lessons to write your book. Is that an accurate proposition?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, what happened was, towards the tail end of me being, 50-50 owners of PN with Phil was, I had wanted to talk about all the things we were doing at PN. Like, obviously, there was like demonstrable success. We ended up selling the company for close to $200 million. So by any metric, that's pretty good. But there's so many cool things. Like, we've always been a remote company, right? And so it's cool if you have a small entrepreneurial thing that's remote, but to get into that valuation range, totally remote from the beginning, using a distributed authority system, we use an organizational structure called holacracy, which got some attention because Zappos adopted it a bunch of years back. But there's just all these cool things we were doing that we thought were special and unique and made it a neat place. And I wanted to start teaching them. I wanted to start also, though, my sort of commitment, I realized, to the industry, like, extended beyond just sort of educating people on nutrition and training. I looked around and I see all these people who are super passionate about health and fitness, who want to make a go at it as a career, or maybe they're thinking about it. They're not sure yet. They just know they love it. And like 4 out of 10 of them won't be here next year. That's the industry-wide turnover rate. If you go into personal training and go work for like Lifetime or an Equinox or one of these clubs, it's over 100% annual turnover. It's just crazy. And so I'm like, it sucks that there are all these people who want to help, who are passionate about this personally and want to help other people. And those people really need the help, whether it comes to some kind of lifestyle change or whatever, some kind of athletic goal they want to accomplish. And there's no blueprint, no path for that, So I'm like, I want to do something about this. I feel like it was a great point at the sort of my transition away from PN to share my 30 years of learnings. So that's where the book came from, So there's chapters on career where we talk about the stuff we just did, like purpose, unique abilities, values. There's stuff on coaching. Like, how do we actually look at coaching into this next generation of coaches beyond how it used to be, which was coaches in health and fitness have all the knowledge and we're going to share it with you. And if you're worthy, you'll take it, go do something with it. And if you don't, you suck. I mean, that's the generation of knowledge we were handed. And that's a problem. It's not going to make any impact. You know what I mean? Like, we need to look at our clients differently and our job differently, rather than as drill sergeant and, troops, more like a collaboration. And so I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about business. I wanted to talk about education. Like, how do you plot your educational path? One of my favorite concepts is the idea of the T-shaped learning model. Are you guys familiar with this? So the idea is, like, if you think about your life and career, and what you've learned as sort of like a T, and across the top, the horizontal of the T, would be all the areas that you need a basic competency in to do the things you want in the world. And the vertical bar of the T being all the areas where you want to go deep into, right? Then you can start plotting out your career and your continuing education and who you're going to mentor with and what you're going to spend time on. You can build out a T for future you. So you're like, here's what I want to be and do. Okay, great. What am I going to need along the horizontal axis? What am I going to need along the vertical? And this is future me. Great. Now I know what to do next for all my education choices, for my, mentorships and internships. Who am I going to learn from? Rather than something just popped up on my social and I'm afraid I'm going to miss out. I'm going to go to that seminar, or I'm going to take that course, or whatever. And I see a lot of people doing that. It's like kind of drunkenly staggering to their future, or maybe not. Maybe they're staggering away from their future. They have no idea, So for me, it's like, how do you plot this thing out? Again, revisiting often, changing as needed, but to create future you. There's a great story about Ernest Hemingway. Some writers have called him sort of like the ultimate T-shaped man. Like, his obvious like vertical bar was his writing, but across the top bar, you read stories about Hemingway, and he was like a war correspondent. Like, he volunteered in the war, and he was like a wine aficionado, and he was a boxer, and he was a fisherman. So these were his like horizontal bar of the T. And if nothing more, like, it made him super interesting. People wanted to be around him because he could talk on almost any subject. They had he had their respect because of his accomplishments in his deep area, So again, I wanted to talk about these kind of concepts and a host of others. I won't go on and on about the book, but the idea was just, could I help create a blueprint for people who want to turn that passion for health and fitness into a real purpose and a career that has some longevity, not something you do in your 20s and 30s until you have a family and you're like, shit, okay, I have to go make some real money now. So I'm out. I'm part of the 40%,
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really cool kind of meta construct that came out of your experience with PN. And for those who weren't familiar, like, precision nutrition, I think was a very important, even though it's become a dominant industry leader, I think at a time it was, at least from a thought leader perspective, a kind of an iconoclast, where when it became popular, we were very much focused on the calories in, calories out model as a solution. Like, if it fits your macros is basically kind of the avatar of that. It was a bunch of folks like me, and all three of us at one point, I would say, who are bodybuilders, yes, highly motivated, focused on tracking numbers and willing to manipulate math to make things work, and ignorant to the fact that we were the weird ones and the rest of the world was not hell-bent on manipulating their body composition as their primary hobby, vocation, and self-identity. So PN stepped in and said, hey, what we really need to do is behavior change. And here are some attempts to do that. And then, got better and better at it over time, and never got pigeonholed. So I think it's cool that exists on its own as something that I think has a lot of value and has done a lot of positive in our industry. But then out of it, your experience in creating it, being involved with it, and collaborating with others, this meta creation is now evolved into your book, which, by the way, I realize we haven't actually directly addressed, and people are going, what book? Like, what's the title? So, JB, if you want to tell us a little bit about, just tell us more about what your book is, and
tell us about
Change Maker. Talking around. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's called Change Maker, and the subtitle is Turn Your Passion for Health and Fitness into a Powerful Purpose and Wildly Successful Career. And it's all the things we've been talking about. It's how do you chart a course for your own self-definition of success in this field. Again, it's some of it has to do with how much money you make, because you need to make some money to stay in a field. A lot of it, though, has to do with the rest of the stuff. You know, the quote that I'm fond of using is like, when I die or retire, you know, how will I know what I did will have made a difference? You know, and yes, socially, globally, but in your personal life, you know, I mean, some of this stems from my own experience, right? I'm like, I don't know, modeled all my young life this hard work ethic. So I know I'm going to work hard, you know? So it would be awesome when I die or retire to know that what I worked at was worth working at. You know what I mean? I'm going to work at something hard anyway. So, and a lot of people, whether they work hard or not so hard or whatever, are still going to put in a lot of hours toward a thing until their death or retirement. So it would be awesome if that accumulated mountain of effort was worth doing, you know, rather than just some shit you did to fill the time until you die, you know? So that's where this book came from, you know, like actually there's like a little Easter egg, like, you know how books will have the dust cover, right? And that's the thing that you see. And then when you take that off, it may have the author's initials stamped on the cover or whatever. So I have this quote on the inside there. So some people are going to find it when they flip off the dust cover, and others won't. They'll never flip off the dust cover. But it's that, you know, that to me is the ultimate question, right? Like bodybuilding, powerlifting, whatever. These are things we're doing to fill the time until we die. You know, like we're podcasting right now, just silly humans doing more stuff to fill the time until our lives.
I mean, I'm gonna, as the guest, I'm gonna allow you to put bodybuilding and powerlifting in those categories. But I think what I've taken out of this whole interview with you as your most important accomplishments was that you competed in bodybuilding. And
huge
so what was your highest? Yeah,
it all went downhill from there, is what Eric's trying to say.
Yeah, I think I'm going to build you back up in the eyes of our audience. What was your highest accomplishment in bodybuilding? I think that's what people need to know.
I won when I was 21. I won the NABA Junior Mr. USA contest, and that contest was my last ever trip on the bodybuilding stage. I won that, and then I decided, like, you know, you have to do a realistic appraisal of yourself and your potential and all that. And I'm like, I can get this far. To go further, I'm going to have to do a bunch of stuff I don't want to do, you know? And I was also, it feels like a tidy story, but I was starting university the Monday after the Saturday that I competed in the NABA contest. So I literally flew, it was in Las Vegas. I flew from Vegas back to Pennsylvania, where I grew up, went right to school, and then that was the next chapter of my life.
Boom. So you heard it here, folks. The reason why you should buy his book, the NABA Mr. USA Junior Bodybuilding Champion, John Berardi.
1995. And many of the listeners are probably not born at that point. But that's okay, because I can tell you how amazing it was and how great of a bodybuilder I was, and there'll be no archives, no records.
You could be that person said back in my day when I used to bench 500 pounds, and no one can question it because there's no photographic or video evidence.
No Instagram of that.
Back when I won the 95 Junior NABA USAs.
That's right.
So you filled space and time before you die with arguably the most dominant of all sports, bodybuilding, and important for our culture and human progression.
That's right. I talk about this in the book. I'm like, sometimes it's interesting to try and unpack why we do things. But I have a friend who's a PhD researcher by day, and evenings and weekends he goes on stage, puts on one of those like old timey handlebar mustaches, wears like the leopard print singlet, and he does strongman feats. He bends iron bars and rips telephone books, and he lifts up adult women, one in each hand or whatever. And what I find so fascinating about this is, like, if you try and find out why he does that, there is no answer. You know what I mean? There's no answer for why we do the things. It's you hit a dead end. It's just because I like it. You know what I mean? And that at a certain point is good enough, right? So whatever weird shit you do to pass the time until you die,
Yeah.
It's
We
fine.
we don't want to. No.
Or
No.
violate other people's
Don't.
rights, and
Yeah. Don't Danny Lennon anyone, but we don't want to explore the dark recesses of that man's brain. So we'll just take him at his word where he says he likes to do it. You know.
And
yeah,
it's
he
and
likes
it's
to do it.
awesome. Just as a quick little side tangent, I just competed in a strongman competition at a small county fair here in New Zealand in Matamata, which is by Hobbiton, where they've.
I saw that. I saw you pressing that big, huge log over your head on your Instagram.
It's a lot of fun.
But you know what? You say it's awesome. Now, I would show that to 10 of my non-strength and physique athlete friends, and they may not agree.
Well,
That's why you
it's
don't
okay to
have
find-
lifting. You don't have friends that aren't lifters. That's what
It's
the short
okay to
answer is.
find 10 people who are wrong. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. You know.
And I remember I learned about this activity where people adults play pirates. So what they do is they take like the equivalent of like parade floats out into the woods, and they create like mock ships out of them. And then for like one orgiastic weekend, they all just go out and like plunder each other's ships,
I love it.
which are not ships. They're flatbed trucks that are made to look like pirate ships sitting in the woods. And you're like, that is no less weird than you going out into some field and being like, I'm going to pick this everything up. Everybody watch me.
Now
You know?
you're coming after Eric from so many angles. First knocking bodybuilding, now strongman. You didn't even know that he's a LARPer, a live action role player, and you just described it.
No, tabletop. Tabletop. There's a significant cultural divide between those two.
What I'm saying is back to the thing earlier, just optionality. You know what I mean? You got to fill some time until you die. And so I think you should be able to do some weird stuff, but you should probably do some meaningful stuff too that makes a difference for others. You know what I mean?
I really want to play that pirate game now. That sounds pretty amazing, actually.
Eric and myself are gonna be looking it up afterwards, having our own fleet. Nice.
I wrote my book, oddly enough, you know? No, but this is it, right? Like, how do we help people figure out those things and then give them tools? You know, like the business chapters about the tools. Like, how do you think about sales and marketing? How do you think about hiring? You know, how do you think about organizing? You know, like organizational structure is just how we are together. If you have more than 5 people working at your company, you need to figure out how to be together, you know, how to act towards each other, who's going to have what roles and stuff. So that kind of stuff. And then, so yeah, I mean, this is it. This is like 30 years of learning, me going, hey, like, can I put this down? And incidentally, like, writing a book on nutrition is way easier than what I just did. I thought this would be no problem. I'm like, I'm just going to talk about what we did at PN. And then 2 years later, I got way more gray hairs. I'm like, this was hard. This was really hard. But mostly because I wanted it to not be full of cliches and like the conventional bullshit advice that you get. Like, so I wanted it to be free of any of that. I wanted it to be full of the things that I think actually mattered. And I don't think you can do that alone. I think you need to show it to a bunch of people that were involved and get their real-time feedback. So there's a thing I teach in the book called thinking aloud. So it's a process that comes from web usability. So what happens is there's this company, Jacob Nielsen Company, and they are sort of the web usability experts. And so they do all this cool research where they put like trackers on your eyes, and then they watch you interact with web interfaces and stuff, and they quantify everything. It's really, really neat. Like science nerds will love what they do. It's not conjecture, it's, you know, research. And so but they're like, when you're designing a new interface, one of the easiest tests, and it's the exact opposite of everything we do, is this thinking aloud thing. So let's say you're building a new website and you want to know if people can use it. Well, you actually just put 20 people on your website, you bring them into the lab, and you ask them to think aloud their process when you give them a project. So you're like, hey, I want you to go buy X or go read the article on Y or whatever. So you give them these little tasks. And then instead of having them do it and watching them, you had them narrate their experience. So like, okay, I'm on the home page now and I'm going to look for the articles. Usually the articles are on the upper right-hand side of a website, but oh, this website has it in a different place. Okay, where is it? And you start to find where people are, their sticking points are, and they become surprisingly common. So now we parse this out, and I do this with almost everything: content now, marketing, ads. So, I teach it in the book, but I used it on the book. So I sent the first draft to 15 people from different industries and walks of life, and had them do thinking aloud feedback on the manuscript itself. So don't edit it, don't make suggestions. What I want you to do is just say what you're thinking and feeling as you're going through it, and just put it in Google Docs comments. So like this would be appropriate feedback. This joke sucks. I didn't laugh. Good. Okay. My feelings won't be hurt. Or this joke was really funny. Or, hey man, I think this is bullshit. I think this is just a cliche. I don't think this actually meant anything or mattered. Or, hey, someone else, I read a book recently that said the opposite of this. You should think about that. And so at the end of that process, I got something. There were like 1,500 comments I had to integrate. But it was the best exercise because it made the book so markedly better, So the point being, I don't think you can do this stuff alone. I don't think you can do great work alone. I don't even think you can avoid like bullshit and cliches alone. That's why peer review exists. But editing and peer review are different from this process. It's why it's one of my favorites. Like, I'm asking no one to fix the problems. I'm just asking them to tell me where they are. I can do it. Like I heard this quote. I think maybe Neil Gaiman.
Oh, Sandman author. Yeah, he's fantastic.
Great author.
Said this. People are great at pointing out the problems. They're just not great at telling you what the fixes are. So I'm like, great. How can I harness the power of people's ability to point out problems? Like, they're doing it all day on socials. They're telling me all about problems with me all day long. You know what I mean? So how do I harness that into doing better work? So thinking aloud is such a great, useful tip for that.
I love it. I mean, the nature of blind spots is that we are blind to them. But the nature of feeling ownership and success and pride and putting out there something that you feel has value that represents your work is solving those problems. So I think that's a perfect marriage of acknowledging the inherent weaknesses of being a human, but then also capitalizing on especially a work that has that speaks to your experience and your wisdom that you're trying to like impart from, hey, here's my whole career, here's the stuff I've figured out. If you were to have someone else fix those problems for you, it would potentially, it might be still valuable, but it would dilute the overall arc of that story and that message, and it wouldn't be, John Berardi's experience on what this looks like and how to take this approach. So I think that's actually a really cool idea, and that's something I thought of in many ways that I could utilize something like that. So that's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to say, John, I think Changemaker, it's coming out, which now, when this episode's released, it'd be right around that time. It's November 5th, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's a pre-order campaign going on right now, so there's the ability to order it right now at a discount for folks, and then it drops on November 5th. That's when it actually starts shipping out from warehouses and stuff like that. But so it's really soon, yeah.
And so this episode right now, which is live, if you're listening to it, it's our present, it's your future.
Sure.
November 5th, it's available on Amazon. It's available everywhere, I would assume, yeah?
Yeah, totally. I mean, what I'd love to do is make available some discount codes for everyone who listened today. I appreciate their time if they hung with us through all the bad Danny Lennon jokes and, mockery of Eric's weird pastimes. The least we can do is give them a little bit of money back in the form of a discount on the book, So we can drop that in the show notes. Also, I have free chapters for download if people are like, this sounds really interesting, I'd love to check it out. If they come to changemakeracademy.com, just about halfway down the homepage, they can see where to get all that stuff. So I made the first couple of chapters available. Plus, there's about 60 like worksheets, activities, thought exercises, and scripts that we didn't include in the book because it would have just been way too huge then, but we made them available online, and I make those available for free also. So people can download all those and get started on them if they want, even without having purchased the book. Hopefully after they do that, they'd be like, oh, this, you know what, $20 for 30 years of experience is a pretty bargain price. They'll go and buy it later anyway. But yeah, if folks want to check it out, they can just pop by and get some of this stuff for download for free. Because for me, this is more about helping this industry that's been so good to me. You know, after the transaction we had with PN, I don't need to sell books. You know what I mean? For me, this is about, you know, when I defined my own purpose, we talked about that a lot earlier. My statement, which I have posted in my office here, so I remember it every single day, is that, you know, when I die or retire, I'd like to know that my work in this field helped coaches see their clients differently, helped those coaches see themselves differently, and helped the industry move forward and mature. You know, I think, and it's not a derogatory thing towards the industry, but we're in a super young industry. I mean, this industry, probably like recreational exercise anyway, and training and coaching people, started like 40 years ago. You know, chemistry's been around for thousands of years, and as have most professions, we're like little infants. You know, so for me, it's like, if the work that we do, you know, we're in the very, very, very beginning. The chemistry for probably 2,000 years was messing around with alchemy, you know, so it's not like when people get down on the industry, I'm like, hey, we need to relax a little bit. You know, you don't expect an infant to run a Ninja Warrior course. You know, you
early specialization, John. That's how you get it. You get that infant on that course early.
Coming right back to it.
Yeah, so for me, that's you know, that's what this is about. You know, that's how I know my purpose will have been met. I don't need credit for any of that. I just want to know it's happened, and maybe my ideas help fuel that a little bit. So I want to give folks as much as I can for free, you know. But I do have a publisher, and they don't want to give away things for free. So if you want to buy the actual hard copy of the book, you have to go buy it from them on Amazon or other fine retailers.
Jeff Bezos, who's gotten suspiciously swole recently, but we'll leave that. I would like to call what you just described. Somehow, yes, I believe. Or maybe he just started wearing schmediums, which is honestly one of the things that you
So wait, you've seen photos of Jeff
in the last handful of years, right, Eric? And he's gone from whatever, let's say a pencil neck, scrawny guy, from scrawny, as you'd say, John, to brawny.
No, I wouldn't say it's quite like the carrot top transformation or anything like that. But he's got
Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle.
So yeah. Oh, I love Dave. I love Dave.
That was the biggest transformation that I've seen of like a public figure in a while.
It's so interesting, synergy of the mind, John, because I was going to say, you're at the Chappelle, to quote Chappelle, you're at the Chappelle stage where I'm rich, bitch. So it's like, you know what, I'm going to do this. This is now what I'm going to do. And as the marketers say, you're going to give an irresistible offer. Well, we'll have all of it in the description for everyone to check out. Everything that you mentioned, the free chapters, the previews, the 60 worksheets. Is there anything, John, you want to say in closing that we have not touched upon or you want to circle back to just to close things out?
I want to close things out, first of all, with an apology to Danny and Nan for...
he stopped listening only about 50 minutes ago.
Danny, I had no idea this was
a hit piece.
I'm so sorry. I just recorded 2 podcasts with him, and I had such a good time, and now this, literally 2 weeks later. So apology to Danny, and then just kind of a reminder to folks, you know, if I know there's probably a lot of listeners who could care less about working in this field. They're just wanting to build muscles and strength and stuff like that. And hopefully some of the lessons we talked about, though, which I think are universal lessons, can be ported over into your pursuit of Jeff Bezos-like swollenness. But for those also who are in the field or who want to, you know, really just that thing we talked about a few minutes ago, like, you're going to work at this. So you might as well make it something that you're super proud of, and that you'll know will have had meaning for you and the other people around you. And hopefully with some of the stuff I'm writing about now and sharing now, we can increase the probability of that happening.
Beautiful.
Love it.
Eric, anything?
Yeah, I just want to thank you for being on, and just to say that I think you've if your mission statement, to sum it up, is to pay it forward, I think you have done that, and it's cool to see that that is still not only still something you're doing, but has become a stronger force behind the mission you're on. And yeah, just appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It was a funny moment. When the PN thing happened, this purpose statement I've shared with you guys here is what I've been saying for years. And then I wrote this book, and then I found myself creating like the Changemaker Academy brand around it. And I was like, oh, it's not all bullshit. I have the chance to chill out and do nothing. And the first thing I did was this. I guess it's really like, you know what I mean? Not that I ever thought it was bullshit, but it's sometimes interesting when the universe gives you a chance to reality test the things that you've been saying, And so I appreciate the kind words. And again, I really enjoyed the chance to connect with you guys today, to have a chat. And then I hope folks watching, listening, get something out of it.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
John, you're an OG. We're going to have everything once again linked in the description. Changemaker, November 5th. The book is launching. Check out the links in the description. I want to thank every single one of you, the Iron Culture, for tuning in. As always, we're back every single Monday with a new episode. You can help us out by leaving a rating and review on iTunes to override the algorithm, to override the thinking machines. And if you're on YouTube, we'll do our best if you leave a comment to respond. So go ahead and do that. We'll catch everyone in that next episode.